Yep.
Order. Nick Fletcher to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered the educational attainment of boys. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship today, Mr Paisley. I would like to thank the Backbench Committee, which agreed to this debate. The Government has been improving the overall standards of education in this country. We can see that with 88% of our schools being good or outstanding. We have been rising up the international rankings on maths, reading and science. Yet today, boys are still not doing as well at school as they should be. They are underperforming and it cannot go on any longer. As well as with their own results, they are also behind girls at every single stage of education. This gender attainment gap is an expression of their underperformance. This is because there is no biological or other intrinsic reason why boys should be behind girls, just as they have been for the past 30 years. It is, of course, not a competition or a battle of the sexes, because we all want our girls to learn, to do well, to reach for the stars. But we must, as a Parliament and as a society, want our boys to do the same. The figures are stark, as is the lack of interest or action, which I will come on to later. Let me run through a few facts. At 11, in reading, writing and maths, 56% of boys meet the expected standard compared to 63% of girls. At 16, 43% of boys and 47.2% of girls received a grade 5 or above in GCSE English and Maths. At 18, 34,000 fewer British 18-year-old boys go to university every year than girls of the same age. Boys are also behind girls in terms of exam performance in A-levels, T-levels and vocational education. At 16 to 24, over 400,000 young men are NEETs, not in education, employment and training. Fewer young men than women are going into the majority of our professions. We should also mention exclusions, another sign of boys not doing so well. The last figures I have show 4,677 boys were excluded from school in 1 year. These figures are hidden in plain sight. The government, education research bodies, think tanks, trade unions and social mobility organisations all know this. Yet there is a silence of inaction, a silence of acknowledgement, a silence of care. We continually have research papers from academic research bodies and think tanks. They highlight the facts, but there is precious little on what should be done. One published only this year focused on how girls were outperforming boys, yet the main recommendation was to ask why so few girls study STEM subjects. Unbelievable. The plight of the boys were made visible. Similar research reports recently give a scant nod to the gender attainment gap, but do not seek to explain why, let alone try and put forward ideas on what to do. Boys' educational underperformance is a truth that no one dare speak its name. Silence across the educational establishment. Some have, and Mr Chair, my honourable friend from Worcester, the Chair of the Education Select Committee, cannot be here this morning because he is chairing the committee at this precise time. But he reminded me recently that the committee has made a number of recommendations about the need to support boys in school. He told me he believes it is a matter of concern that boys are disproportionately represented amongst many groups, that he wants schools to be inclusive and to unleash the potential in every pupil, that understanding the best ways for them to support boys and drive forward their academic attainment is so important. And Mr. Chair, I know he welcomes this timely debate. I chair the all-party parliamentary group on issues affecting men and boys. Our fourth policy report this Parliament focused on boys' educational and underperformance. As in all our reports, we asked experts in the UK and across the world to speak to us. Crucially, this included 6 brilliant head teachers from across the UK who have closed the gender attainment gap, from Dorset, London, Cheltenham, Birmingham, Sussex and Rochdale, all in a way that has also supported their female students too. We also heard from a national network of educators led by Dr. Alice Blower, the Access and Participation Development Manager at Arts University Bournemouth. They are implementing an educational framework based on the Taking Boys Seriously principles developed at Ulster University. I recommend it highly as a starting point, alongside how the 6 head teachers are actually succeeding at a practical level. From what the successful school leaders told us, there were 4 main pillars which need to be adopted. Firstly, schools and trusts need to recognise the gap and collect data. Then commit themselves throughout the school to address it continuously. From the board down to teaching assistants, it is a whole school cultural approach. There has to be institutional will from the top to the bottom. The schools found that the problem is not with the boys, it's with the way the adults treat them. They found, for instance, that some teachers were sanctioning boys more harshly than girls for the same offence, that they had lower expectations for boys and were inadvertently rewarding them for lower effort. Once the teachers recognised this, the improvements were immediate. They found that many of the disengaged teenage students were also those with low literacy skills, which they had when they arrived at secondary schools aged 11. The successful schools put in place careful monitoring and interventions to ensure language and reading skills enable the student to understand the lesson. It's basic stuff, it's not rocket science. You cannot expect the pupils to learn if they cannot access the curriculum because they do not have the basics. I will happily send the Minister a summary of what the successful schools have done. Secondly, they create a boy-positive environment, one which is inclusive, fair, including with discipline, relational and aspirational. It is important that the boys and their parents recognise this includes them too, and parents are supported if needed, where boys are not seen as a problem. It is just that they need encouragement, understanding, being believed in, given self-esteem, and they do need pushing. They need high expectations, their successes celebrated, and to understand the point of what they are being taught. Thirdly, there needs to be some tactical interventions, especially on literacy, oracy and study skills, plus role models and mentors. The successful schools did not see role models and mentors as necessarily being outside of school or in the media. They simply made sure that older boys were visible, succeeding in all subjects. Not just the traditional subjects as football and physics, but also in drama, music and history. These are not needed for all boys, but are needed for some, especially for boys with no father or positive male role models at home or within their community. More male teachers are needed to show boys that learning is for them too. It is telling that 80% of teachers told me that not having enough male teachers in school is a problem. More so given 30% of primary schools have no male teachers at all. Yet, as we know, the Department for Education and teaching and training institutions fail to specifically promote teaching as a career for young men. We have asked, but it is ignored. Lastly, as a society, we need to simply better take care of our boys and support them when they need it. The school's identified attitude which harm boys' progress are not limited to the school environment. We all, as a society, have inadvertently developed a culture which the boys' experience is being hostile to them. We have developed the belief that boys' underachievement is somehow natural and normal. It's because boys will be boys. The negative narrative on boys and the indifference that boys face, especially those with problems, has to change. 41% of sixth form boys and girls have been told in school lessons that boys are a problem. 2 in 5 boys have been told by schools or outside organisations invited into schools that they are a problem. Let that sink in. 2 in 5. That is shameful. It is a shameful statistic, and those schools need to take responsibility. Because what do we feel the impact will be? It's hardly going to be positive, is it? Too many boys feel ignored, marginalised and unsupported. We also need to deal with other problems the adult world causes them. Family dysfunction, a lack of community aspiration and opportunity, gangs and criminal pathways, social media's so-called influencers. So what to do? As well as the points above, which are aimed at all involved in education, the APPG asked the government to do a number of things. A few of these are below. We need to provide political leadership and a narrative that publicly acknowledges that the gender attainment gap exists and that boys' relative underperformance is a problem the whole educational community has to solve. We need to launch or fund a sector-wide task and finish group and a summit of head teachers to find and promote solutions. Invite successful heads to guide the task force and the government's thinking. A ring-fenced research programme on understanding and addressing the gender attainment gap. Launch a This Boy Can campaign, similar to its STEM is for Girls campaign and other initiatives. To specifically promote careers in teaching and other professions, including in health and social care. This would also put pressure on career services as well. We need to tell Ofsted to include the gender attainment gap in their assessment of schools and give a positive assessment to schools that have policies and initiatives in place to address it. More encouragement of mentoring schemes for boys, whether from current or former pupils or community leaders. And for boys with no fathers or positive male role models at home, I urge the government, but also the wider educational community, to take action. As a society, a government and a parliament that believes in inclusion and equality, this cannot continue. We must not and cannot tolerate our boys not doing as well at school as they should. The time to stop the inaction and for ignoring this issue has come. We have to come together and tackle the underachievement of boys in our schools, and we can and must do it together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for bulbing, colleagues. So the question is that the House has considered the educational attainment of boys. Jim Shannon.
Mr Chairman, pleasure to serve under your chairship. And can I first of all thank the honourable gentleman for Don Valley for putting it forward. He has spoken on this issue so many times in Westminster Hall, but also in the Chamber. Real passion for the subject. He encapsulates the concerns that he has for his constituents and for those young boys. I will do likewise for my constituency, because it's something that has been on my radar all my time, Mr Chairman, as an elected representative, both as a councillor back when I first started in 1985, right through as an MLA at the Assembly, and now as the MP. the honourable member for Don Valley has very clearly laid out the problem that exists, and join with him in speaking out for those young boys who seem to fall through the cracks. I can well remember, Mr. Chairman, it's a long time ago, of course, but I can well remember as a boy, my attention was hard won by the teachers at school. Sometimes your mind tended to wander, and for that reason, perhaps many a duster sailed past my head, many a cane came down upon my hand, all justified, Mr. Chairman, and well deserved of it. I think it didn't do me any harm. The fact is, I think it maybe motivated me and challenged me to focus a wee bit more in the class and to do the right things. Times were much different, is the issue I'm trying to relate to. And I can remember of teachers encouraging me. I'm also have to say, Mr. Chairman, as you, Mr. Chairman, and I both would be very encouraged by our parents, mum and dads both, for what they do. They're the motivation for us in many cases. They're the encourager to make us try to achieve higher goals and higher things, and we're very thankful for our parents. And they ensured that we went through the exams, went straight out to work, but I certainly knew how easy it would be to have been to slip just through the cracks like those other young people the Honourable Gentleman for Don Valley referred to. Every time an A-level or a GCSE results came out, I like to remind those who feel disappointed, and I say this very, very humbly, Mr. Chairman, I didn't excel at exams the way that I should have, probably because it was a matter of case of not focusing the way I should and putting the hard swat in, which was necessary. But you know something, I also very gently and very humbly again, Mr. Chairman, say that I started work and progressed through that to my own business and ultimately as an elected representative. So there are things that can be done, and just because they don't work out when you're 16, 17 and maybe even 18-year-old doesn't mean that life's over, that it can't get better. The issue of education attainment for boys is one that my colleagues in Strangford, the then Education Minister Michelle McAlpine, the former Education Minister, now peer Lord Weir of Ballyholme, and worked on very closely. And we now have a good friend of you, Mr. Chairman, of mine as well, the Education Minister, Paul Gibbon, who really focuses upon those issues back home. There's an accepted fact in Northern Ireland that Protestant males from working class backgrounds are the lowest achievers, with some other all-boys schools only having around 30% of pupils attaining A to C and 5 GCSE. So there are a lot of things to do back home, not the Minister's responsibility, of course, but I say these because it relates to the story that we have before us and the debate we have before us today. The topic has been the subject of numerous reports and actions taken to see how we can improve these outcomes at what some have labelled as a generational educational problem. It's a subject that, again, I say that, along with our colleague, Mr. Chairman, the Honourable Member for East Belfast, or Belfast East, at the Don High School, the underachieving of young Protestant males is very similar in his constituency as it is in mine. One of my constituents works in a school. He's only 5 boys in his class. He caters to them day and daily on an individual basis because that's the focus on his responsibility. Some of the boys are incredibly bright but also incredibly troubled, with backgrounds that make their outlook in life understandable. And other boys struggle with the basics and use anger as an attempt to distract from what they believe is their failure. But in my opinion, the failure is not theirs. I don't believe it is. It is ours. The society we live in, the educational system that we have in place, those who have allowed a situation which means that those who don't thrive academically feel like failures. We've got to make sure that they don't feel like failures. We've got to lift them above that. I often think of the fact that we need surgeons, Mr. Chairman, but we also need the people who make the scalpels, who make the surgeon's tools. Those who manufacture the knives are as necessary as those who wield the knife. And this fact seems to have been lost in some approaches to learning. It's really important that the teaching we have for our young people encapsulates their attention and takes them forward. By saying this, I'm so aware that the programmes in Northern Ireland, such as the USEL programme, which takes those children referred by social workers who have slipped through the gap to provide them learning and employment, but more importantly, to help them find their place in a fulfilling way. I'm reminded that I've sat on the Board of Governors of Glasgow College, Mr. Chairman, since 1987, whatever, like the time, I've been 37, 38 years approximately. And I always remember my boys grew up with young boys from Grey Abbey. Them young boys, some of them young boys were never going to achieve educational standards, never going to happen. But you know what they were going to do? They were going to work. They were going to work in the farm. They were going to work in the building sites, because that's where their vocation was. Opportunities aren't always with education, but the opportunities to have education must be there, and that's what we're really asking for. I'm asking to make sure that those young boys have that opportunity and can do those things. The programmes are vital in this, and in speaking to a lady who was involved in running one of those programmes in a cafe recently, she told me that the overwhelming majority were young boys who simply didn't feel worth anything, or feel that they could not achieve anything more than, in some cases, honestly, Mr. Chairman, their dads were in prison, or they didn't even know who their dad was. That's a fact of society. It's a fact of life. It's not a judgment, by the way, never a judgment, never an observation. It's an observational point I'm making. I'm making it because we've got to reach out. And we've got to try and do it better and bring people forward. And it is heartbreaking. And the need for programmes in small classes is also clear. But so is the need to change the structure to ensure that those who excel in the practical know that they are valued and vital, and that take changes from this route. Now, it all takes money, and the Minister's in his place. No better person to ask this question that we're going to ask in education. No better person from the Minister who's here to encapsulate what our thoughts are, put them together in a way, and then tell us how the education system here in the mainland will work. It takes money, it takes determination to help to make a change. And this is the message that we need to be sending from this House today, from this debate. Grades are important. Educational standards are vital, and they are, but they're not. They don't always, Mr. Chairman, with respect, equate to success. And I say that gently but honestly. Success is finding happiness, fulfilment. Success is finding joy in life, and you need to know your worth, Mr. Chairman. You need to know your worth to achieve that. Today should and must be that first step in the way to find just that. Thank you.
Very much. Steve Double.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paisley. It's an honour to serve under your chairmanship. Can I begin by wishing everyone a very happy St. Piran's Day. St. Piran is the patron saint of tin miners that we have adopted in Cornwall as our national saint, hence my attire. So just to explain that. I very much congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Don Valley, for securing this debate on a very important issue. I know one that he feels very passionately about, as do I, and he opened this debate by laying out the case very, very clearly. But let me start by saying that although this debate is about academic attainment, and clearly that is very, very important, I would also add that I don't think it should just be about that. That I stand before you as someone who actually left school at 16. Most of my teachers, as I often say, think I left long before then. And really couldn't wait to get out of education. And although I did quite well in my O-levels, I'm a great believer that actually, although education and academic attainment is important, it isn't by any means the only important thing in life. And I'm actually a believer that the most important lessons I learnt in life, I actually didn't learn in the classroom. I learnt outside the classroom. And I think we just need to keep things in perspective. Sometimes I feel, as a country, as a government, we put so much emphasis on academic attainment, and that actually becomes counterproductive for those, particularly boys, who don't reach those attainments, and then they feel that, you know, they haven't quite come up to the mark, and then maybe become demotivated as a result. So I just want to say, you know, it really needs to be about more than just academic attainment. I do, having said that, think we have a real challenge in this country when it comes to how we educate, support, equip, enable boys to really fulfil their potential in life. I think some figures recently came out showed that there are now 83,000 more boys who are not in education, employment or training than girls. And that really should raise a number of questions. Why is there such a big disparity between boys who opt out, who drop out of education training and are not in jobs, than there are girls? And I think we also only have to look at the suicide rate among men, and particularly young men. to really wonder what is going on in our country, in our society today. That there are three-quarters of all suicides are men. And it is the biggest killer of men under 50 in this country. And that should really concern us as to what is going on with the way that we support and help and treat men, that so many of them decide to take their own lives. And I think there are a number of factors for that. I mean, I'm so glad, I speak as someone who has been father to two boys who are now grown men in their own right, a granddad to three. Two of them are boys. For the avoidance of doubt, the other one is a girl. I'm so grateful. Actually, I'm not a young man today, because we seem to bombard our young men with so many negative messages about being a man. The whole thing about toxic masculinity that really, I think, just pushes negative messages all the time to young men, who then wonder, what are they meant to be? Who are they meant to be? How are they meant to behave? And I think we just need to take a long look at ourselves. I absolutely understand and agree and support that we've needed to address the inequality that many women have experienced in our society for a long time. And we have made huge progress in that. But that shouldn't be, as a result of that, putting men down. And I feel sometimes that is actually what we have produced, and we need to think carefully about that. I also get concerned that we seem to put so much expectation on teachers today. And I'm a great believer that the family and having a stable, loving, positive family environment is actually the single thing that determines the outcome for boys and girls, for all children. And teachers clearly have an important role in providing education, but so often we expect our teachers to do far more than educate. We expect them now to be social workers and mental health professionals and all sorts of other things. And the state can't do everything. And I do worry sometimes that we are always looking for the state, whether that be schools and education and teachers or other parts of the public sector, to provide the answers to all these challenges, when actually I believe that most of the answers actually lie in the family. And the government has made some really positive steps in terms of supporting families and providing support for parents, and that's hugely welcome. But I think there's more we could do to actually help and support parents to fulfil their role, rather than expecting teachers and other parts of the state to do it for them. One of the things that I have noticed, and I know the Minister is aware of this, and I'm grateful for his engagement and meeting with me to discuss this, that in Cornwall we are seeing a huge rise, as I know we are in other parts of the country as well, of school children who are suffering with mental health conditions or have neurodiverse conditions, and the education system is struggling to support them properly, and we're finding many parents actually taking their children out and off-rolling them as a result. And my observation is disproportionately there are more boys affected by this than girls. And I do think we need to look at what more we can do to provide support to those children, and indeed to the parents of children who are struggling with these challenges. And as the Minister knows, fining them is not the answer. And I have to put on record, I was disappointed that the government are going to increase the fines for parents for unauthorised absence. It's not something I agree with at all, and I think that actually increasing the fines is definitely the wrong thing to do. We need to provide support and help to make sure that children who are struggling with these conditions actually get the support that they need, rather than threatening their parents with fines for them not being able to attend school. The final point I'd really like to make, Mr. Chairman, is that when we talk about boys and the underachievement of boys, a report commissioned by the former Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, when she was Prime Minister, into disparity between race and ethnic disparity in this country, actually found that the most disadvantaged group in our country, or among the most disadvantaged groups in our country, are white working-class boys in coastal towns. And I would just ask to the Minister, what have we done with that information? Because we certainly see this in Cornwall, where clearly we have many, many coastal towns and villages, that actually it is young people growing up in those communities, and particularly boys in those communities, who really do consistently underachieve. The recent census carried out, and along with my Cornish colleagues, we worked hard to get Cornish as a recognised national identity within that census, and we managed to do that. And that's been really helpful, because we now have real data on how Cornish people are faring. But it found that in the 18 to 24-year-olds, only 14% of those who identified as Cornish went on to further or higher education, whereas nationally it's 34%. And so we are 20%, the Cornish are 20% behind the national average when it comes to these things. So again, I would say to the Minister, what are the government doing about this? We are very much aware of the underfunding of schools in rural areas, and the government has begun to address that, but there's still a long way to go. But I think we do need to look at the funding of schools and other services in coastal areas, because so many young people growing up in our coastal towns and villages find themselves disadvantaged because of the very nature of the challenges that coastal towns find themselves. And this is feeding through into the underachievement of those young people, particularly young boys. So I would just ask the Minister, what more can the government do to support coastal communities and make sure that coastal communities and schools in coastal communities get the resources they need, so that we can close this disparity gap, so that young people growing up in our coastal towns and villages do not suffer the disadvantage that they have done for far too long. I believe that this is something that really should exercise the government and ministers, particularly in the Education Department, to look at what is going on and provide the support that we really need to see in Cornwall and other coastal parts of the country. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir David Avenant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Begin by congratulating my honourable friend, the member for Don Valley, on securing this incredibly important debate on the educational attainment of boys this morning. And I would congratulate him also on his excellent and constructive speech, giving a lot of food for thought, I'm sure, for the Minister and his team. Like him, I've raised this matter in debate and discussion on numerous occasions, and not enough has been done to date by our government to address these issues, despite the fact that our government has been very successful in all that it has done in the last decade to improve and be positive and successful in our education system. I'd like to begin to pay tribute to the tireless work on men and boys issues by my friend and campaigner Mark Brooks OBE, who has done so much in this to raise this issue outside of this chamber in campaigning across the country. Overall, we know that there is an attainment gap between boys and girls. This is not a recent phenomenon and has been the case for many years. The trend is continuing, and at all stages of education, boys lag behind girls. I'm a great believer, Mr. Paisley, in social mobility, and education is an important path to achieve that. Opportunity through education and offering good education is what we all want. As a former teacher and lecturer, I have been disappointed to see how this issue of education attainment for boys has not progressed in the way that, as a former teacher, I would have liked to have seen, and I know the Minister will agree with that too. Girls outperformed boys at the expected standards of all subjects in 2023, except for maths, where they were kind of neck and neck, or maybe the boys were slightly better. In reading, 76% of girls met the expected standard, down from 80% in 2022, while 70% of boys met the expected standard, which was unchanged from 2022. That's a huge gap in education achievement between boys and girls. And I would like to highlight and take after my honourable friend for Cornwall about the underachievement of white working class boys, which has made the headlines quite a number of times in the past decade. There's obviously no quick fix to this long-standing and growing problem, which has developed into something of a taboo subject, not only as both the previous speakers have highlighted the fact that we've concentrated on women's issues, which are very, very important, but we have somewhat neglected some of the male issues which my colleagues have already raised, and I won't repeat. But though it is the case that white working class boys from disadvantaged backgrounds underperform boys against all the other races and ethnicity in our country. Why? That is the question. And this demographic is falling further and further behind and shows no signs of catching up. This is a huge worry. In fact, white males eligible as schoolboys for free school meals have lower higher education participation rates than any other group when analysed by sex, ethnicity and free school meals. Even for those not eligible for free school meals, white boys still trail with a participation rate of 36.4% to the highest participation are from Chinese boys. Why? Why have governments of different political persuasions not attacked this problem and come forward with issues? What should be done? What can be done? We've heard some examples already, and I won't go down the route of repetition. What I would say, we need to seriously look at tackling this problem, but to do so, it is accepted that a lot of working class white boys have disadvantaged backgrounds, and that has to be helped and overcome. We understand the reasons, but what action should we be taking? Well, I think schools need to adapt more, and the curriculum needs to be adapted. I mean, I totally accept that academic excellence isn't the only thing that matters, but there's a lot more jobs and opportunities out there that are not based on academia. Then we need good role models. It's absolutely vital. Now, the family is the primary educator, and one hopes parents will take a huge input into this. Teachers, of course, but there are many others. Local sportsmen and women, businesses and former students, particularly those who have been really successful. And in schools in my constituency of Bexleyheath and Craven, quite often we get in those people to infuse the young boys and to make them realise that, yes, you've got to have a basic education, but beyond that, there are huge opportunities in sport, in business, in retail, in music and entertainment. There's a great wide world out there that isn't based on academia. There are many careers and jobs, unfortunately, that teachers are not knowledgeable about. I mean, it's absolutely true that teachers do a fantastic job. They're dedicated and hard-working. But former students who can come in, or successful footballers or whatever, come in to talk to boys about their careers, their lives. That is a great motivator, I believe. And when you look at today's society in our country, there are such huge opportunities. And we want these underprivileged lads to have that opportunity to advance themselves. But they need to have the understanding of what's there. And I think it isn't just the academic curriculum, it is getting teachers and parents informed of what is available and the roots of how people got to these successful career opportunities. Now, I know great teachers can give inspiration for life. And we all remember, inspiring and motivational teachers. I had one in the sixth form many, many years ago called Peter Sillis. He was my history teacher. And he was a great motivator for people to do jobs not just in the academic. He always told me I had the wrong political views, but then that was the 1960s, and I'm afraid all the teachers were left-wing. But it didn't stop us from being on the front desk opposite him in the teaching lessons, arguing back whenever possible. He was a great Harold Wilson supporter. Well, I won't go any further with that one. But, I mean, and there are many, many dedicated, outstanding teachers who we are grateful for. And we praise teachers because it's a difficult job in today's society. More difficult than it was when I was a teacher and when I was at school, because society has changed, and I'm afraid the behaviour has also changed. But teachers, however inspirational, good, cannot do the work alone. They require the backing of the education establishment, the government, academics, businesses, industry, general population, believing in the teachers, believing in the boys. And we need to motivate them. But of course, the parents are the primary educators, and we need to help them, enthuse them, get them to be positive, get them to look at what can be done. And many of our academies, which is a great triumph of our particular Conservative government, that has opened up a different world, and they run differently from when I was teaching and when I was at school. And that has been a real positive achievement. And quite often the academies at secondary schools have people in to offer advice and discuss. We've heard, of course, that there's a shortage of male teachers, and that is a regret, because a lot of our primary schools have few, if any, male teachers, and that may be very difficult for families where at home the mother is bringing up the children without a role model, a male role model. We must never forget, Mr. Paisley, that the boys from the most economically deprived areas of our country are just as clever, talented and able as anybody in the best areas. What they lack is the opportunity, the chance for the support, encouragement, confidence, which is such a key in today's society. To be confident that you can do it, that you will do it. And I think that my old friend Ray, reaching for the stars, I think that is a good matter to highlight. They can succeed if they get the opportunity to succeed. Now, we do need more publicity from the government. We need it from the academies. We need it from businesses. We need it across. And we need more investment in boys at an earlier age, particularly the white working class lads. In particular, we must not let at any time boys decry education, to get disillusioned and opt out. Or we'll have an underclass who are not educated and haven't had the potential, the opportunity to make something great of themselves. Yes, we need qualifications, but it's the basics that they all need. The ability to read and write and to get confident with maths. And then hopefully see what the opportunities are by bringing in people into the schools who are not educationalists. I mean, I know we as politicians all go into the schools and talk about life at Westminster, or life, but what we need is more people to go into the schools and talk about their careers. If we don't, society will be disadvantaged, not just individuals, because there's a huge talent out there among young white males, young males, which need to be grasped and made a positive future for all of them. So I think this debate is very, very important. I know my old friend the Minister is listening with great concentration. But he does need to take back to the department that this is an issue. The government has done good things on so many other areas, but this one is still in his in tray.
Thank you, Mr. Paisley. It's a pleasure to follow the honourable gentleman. And can I agree with him that no one forgets a good teacher? Indeed, my own socialist English teacher remains in regular contact with me, continuing to lobby me and raise issues with me almost on a weekly basis. Mr. Paisley, it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and can I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Don Valley, on securing this debate, and also congratulate his APPG's report on this very important issue. Education is everything. It is the route to opportunity and the way to ensure that everyone is best equipped to fulfil their ambitions and dreams. It is indeed a silver bullet. Research shows that boys perform worse than girls on most major educational indicators through their school years. There are some figures in particular that should cause us concern. Boys are more likely to be suspended, twice as likely to face permanent exclusion, and less than 60% of boys meet the expected standard in all of English, reading, writing and maths. Mr. Paisley, there are specific groups of boys particularly impacted by low attainment. For those eligible for free school meals, only 34% of white British boys, 35% of mixed white and black Caribbean boys, and 36% of Caribbean boys attained a grade 4 in both English and maths GCSEs in 2023. Most noticeably, boys from Gypsy, Roma or traveller backgrounds have especially low pass rates. I mention the Gypsy, Roma, traveller community, particularly as Darlington has a high proportion of that population. And at this junction, I do want to particularly mention St Teresa's Primary School, which is led by the excellent head, Paula Strachan, who has done so much work focusing on the GRT community. Mr. Paisley, we must take these figures seriously, and whilst the government has and is taking steps to close the gap, having driven up standards over the past decade, in Darlington we now have 80% of schools rated as good or outstanding in comparison to 2010, when only 65% of our schools met those standards. However, we must not forget that the young working class boys from the groups I mentioned, who are kids that so often miss out on so much. Mr. Paisley, in Darlington, I have seen firsthand that many working class kids miss out on aspiration and inspiration to succeed in education. Many of these boys come from families where they may not have a male role model, or indeed, if they do, that male role model might not be in employment. Being encouraged to succeed is much more the norm in middle-class households and indeed in some ethnic minority communities. That is something that we can and must change. It is down to us as politicians, our schools, community groups, government, and perhaps most importantly of all, parents taking a lead in inspiring kids to want to take education seriously, and for schools to have the resources to facilitate this. In my role as the MP for Darlington, I have made sure that I have spent time at every single one of the 36 schools in Darlington, hosting assemblies, answering questions, and talking about my career in business and politics. It might only be a small thing, but it might be the one thing that inspires one person. And I know that the honourable member leading this debate has organised an amazing programme of role model lectures in his local schools, and his work in this area is an example to us all. I would be interested in hearing from the Minister as to what plans there are for more innovative ways to inspire and teach the boys who are falling behind where we want them to be. It is my view that reading is a good place to start. The library at Skerne Park Primary School was opened last year by children's author Cressida Cowell as part of her life-changing library scheme in partnership with the Book Trust. The project gave the school a dedicated library space and new books, and has inspired teachers to put reading at the forefront of the curriculum. On my visits to Skerne Park, I have been delighted to see the enthusiasm for which pupils talk about what they are reading and how much the variety of books embraces children's creativity and imaginations. Many of these inspired kids were those who may have previously missed out on more conventional forms of education. Mr. Paisley, I was also delighted when the historic Crown Street Library in Darlington reopened its doors last year, having been saved by community campaigners after the Labour Council sought to close it down. This is a place where children, parents and carers can further indulge in reading in a vibrant place and a huge variety of books, which is beautifully decorated with murals depicting scenes from Charles Mackessy's wonderful The Boy, the Mole, the Fox and the Horse. It's also a vital hub for our community, with a focus on being welcoming to children, therefore encouraging them to read. It also helps to inspire parents to encourage and embrace their children in learning. It's facilities like this that can really inspire a love of reading and open doors to other worlds for our children. In addition to this, Mr. Paisley, we must not ignore the need for further focus on SEND children. As of January last year, 22% of boys were identified as having special educational needs. This is a further sign that we must look at innovative ways to make sure these children are educated in a way that best fits them. And whilst there remains over 300 children in Darlington waiting up to 3 years for a CAMS assessment, there is much more still needs to be done to help ensure that more boys are not missing out. Before I conclude, Mr Beasley, I must put on the record my concerns about Labour's plans to tax private education. I recently visited Dame Allen School in Newcastle and was blown away by the numbers of places that they give to local disadvantaged community, funded entirely by themselves. That all could be thrown away if VAT is added to school fees and risks robbing that opportunity from that community. Finally, Mr Paisley, we cannot uneducate a person who has learned to read. To be armed with the basics, you lay the ground for an individual to succeed. Education is, as I have said, a silver bullet to achievement, and I look forward to hearing from the Minister as to what more the Government is doing in this area.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr Paisley. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship. It's great to follow the Honourable Member for Darlington, who raised some incredibly interesting and pertinent points. I agree with him especially at the end about trying to put VAT on private schools. There's a special school, a private special school in Hellaby in my constituency, Abbeywood, and that deals with people with severe SEN needs. And I worry that if this VAT comes on, that school will close, and that will have a detrimental effect on Rother Valley and our children with special needs. I also want to especially pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Don Valley for the work, time and effort he has put into championing and supporting men and boys in this place, through the APPG, by the same name, and by consistently raising it in debates and questions. This is an issue that I know he feels strongly on, and I believe he is making a real difference in raising the profile of these issues. I believe prior to his election, these issues weren't raised nearly as much as they are now, and he really is giving a voice for men and boys and their place in this world. I thank him for that. Now, it is an undeniably shocking statistic that more than 3 times as many men who take their own lives every year than women. In fact, suicide is the biggest killer of men under 50, with one taking place every 90 minutes, or as long as this debate is going to last in this place. Now, to tackle this epidemic, and I believe a lot of this does stem from education at schools and the lack of attainment we're going to discuss, there needs to be a new approach. There have been some incredibly effective adverts and advice. I recall Norwich City FC's incredibly powerful "You're Not Alone" advert spring to mind. But that is focused on tackling the symptoms and not addressing some of the causes of this problem of male suicide. Now, in order to address any problem, especially with this issue, we must start with young people, and schools are the perfect place to help build self-esteem and character to grow the boys of today and the men of tomorrow. On the facts, however, it is clear that schools are often not yet a welcoming, nurturing place where all young men can thrive. As we've already discussed today, boys are more than twice likely to be excluded from school, and even by the end of reception, we're already significantly behind girls in attainment levels. These shaky foundations do nothing for the rest of the boys' education, eventually leading to tens of thousands fewer boys attending universities than their female peers. Crucially, and especially in less well-off areas, this trend is exaggerated by external factors. Boys on free school meals continue to be let down by schools who fail to provide an environment geared towards them, and this has a consequential effect on their grades and thus their lives. After all, everything from earnings to employments, from happiness and suicide rates, swings heavily in favour of university graduates. And the picture is even worse for white, working-class boys from disadvantaged background, who are the least likely group to gain entry to our elite universities of any single socioeconomic characteristic. Now, we often see universities priding themselves on their diversity and inclusiveness statistics, but when it comes to white working-class boys from disadvantaged background, all universities are abjectly failing. There are not enough, frankly, there are barely any outreach programs to this demographic group who just are not going to university. Now, these people, these boys, these young men, through no reason other than being a boy or being born into working class areas like mine, are pushed away from higher education and face a statistically worse quality of life and even an earlier death. What then is to be done to support the boys through education so they can grow into happy, fulfilled men? If the problem starts with early education, then how can we foster a healthier, more boy-friendly educational system? Getting more men into teaching is clearly a good start. Male role models can play an important part of developing a healthy sense of self and growing into a well-adjusted man. Now, only a quarter of teachers with whom boys in school might spend the majority of their time are male. So we must do more to encourage men to re-engage with schools and bring down a shift towards helping understanding young men rather than excluding them. But then when we go to the nursery sector, so even before schools, that is dramatically worse. Only 3% of nursery teachers are men. 3%. Now that is a shocking statistic. So from the very earliest age, and I thank the government for opening up the childcare places, which my girls are benefiting from, so I thank the Minister for that, only 3% are male teachers. That's an absolute disgrace. We need to make sure that young boys see men as role models, as leaders, as learners, as educators, literally from as soon as they go to university, because they're not. And that sets the train, unfortunately, for later failures. Now, the problem of this cannot just be solved with more male teachers. For instance, I know that young women can make and do make brilliant and inspiring teachers and are clearly good role models for young men. But there are thousands of small changes right across the educational system that could incrementally improve it for boys. For example, encouraging boys to play sports or perhaps to learn an instrument, both of which would prove beneficial impacts on education and so on life. Perhaps we should be opening up a diversity of scholarships to working-class boys at schools, making higher education more accessible and open to a group who are universities are failing. Perhaps, though, the single most important thing we can do is to continue open up conversation about our failure to properly provide suitable education for boys, especially white working-class boys, where they can reach their full potential. We need to encourage a sense of togetherness and allyship, where currently there might be division or gender bias, to make sure they're supporting their educational career. We need an open and honest conversation, both within schools and between schools, to explore how to best support boys on their development towards young men. We need to recognise the effects of education, and particularly the rejection from education some boys feel on the rest of their lives, so to build schools and universities designed to welcome and champion them. Now, I completely agree with my honourable friend about bringing back former teachers and alumni, males, to talk to boys. I think in my schools in Rother Valley, such as Wales High School, they do that very well. But I think all schools should be bringing back as many people to talk to them, to show success, to show there is a future, to encourage them that they can achieve anything. And that leads me on to a couple of my other points I want to make, which are about the structural failings. Because I don't think we have actually touched on some of the structural failings at the moment. For instance, a University of Kent study not that long ago found that actually boys felt they weren't expected to do well at school. This boys will be boys attitude, I'm sure we've all seen it. Oh, he's misbehaving, he's not like, boys will be boys, they'll be fine. It's the girls who are sitting and reading. Yeah, boys will be boys, of course. But they're no less good than girls. And especially when it comes to education as well. And if boys are allowed to run amok, allowed to run around, right, treated differently in that sense, then they won't have the same expectations. We need to make sure they have the expectations. And I thought the University of Kent study was incredibly insightful, because when they interviewed primary school boys, the boys themselves felt they didn't need to achieve the same as girls. They weren't expected to achieve the same as girls. But that's wrong. They need to achieve the same as girls. And we need to make sure it's the same. Another one is, and I hate to say this, and I know my honourable member for Don Valley will criticise me for using this word, is gender bias. The University of Trento in Italy found there was a gender bias in marking of educational papers. When the girls' names and boys' names were on the same papers, they found boys were statistically marked lower, harder than girls. But when they did a blind test of exam papers, they found actually they were equals. So there clearly is some sort of gender bias against boys when it comes to marking. And if that's going through the school, that's going to lower the expectations of boys. That's going to retard some of their progress. And that is wrong. Another aspect we should talk about, because I think every member here has mentioned that boys need to be encouraged, nurtured, treated differently, given better role models, is single-sex schools. Only 6% of schools in the UK are single-sex. And the majority of those are actually female single-sex schools. Now, I'm not saying single-sex schools are the best, better or worse than mixed schools, but surely there needs to be an open conversation. But if boys are doing worse at school, and they clearly are, we all agree with that, surely there needs to be schools which are geared to try and raise up some of the boys, raise up some of the white working-class disadvantaged boys, and perhaps maybe that should be in a single-sex educational space. Now, to declare an interest, I went to a single-sex male school myself, obviously, and I had a great time. I thought it was wonderful. I was nurtured, loved it. It was a very good school. I also have 2 girls who, wherever they school, they will do very well. But I do think we need to look at that as well, because there has been a drive since the 1970s to get rid of single-sex schools. And I think for some boys, especially, and some girls, maybe single-sex schools are the right place to educate them. And last thing I want to touch on before I close up is the ultimate responsibility for boys' education, and that is parental responsibility. We cannot get away. The majority of the time a boy will spend will be with their family, and the family is the bedrock of society, the bedrock of education, and the bedrock of their future. We need to do more to support those families, because it is the families, the role models of the families, the way they're treated in the families, that is going to have the biggest effect on what they do at school, not what a teacher says, what they spend most of their times. And we should make sure that all policy, when we do this, has that family-friendly, family-centric approach first, because that is the most important thing for success for everyone, male or female. Now, I just want to sum up by thanking the Honourable Member for Don Valley, and obviously the all-party group's report about improving the lives of half the education, but we don't improve the lives of everyone else. Turning schools towards, not away from young men, will only serve to improve their lives, and those of everyone in the community. We cannot allow the unseen killer of suicide to continue to claim men's lives without addressing the root cause of these tragic deaths. And schools are clearly where we need to start. Thank you.
Thank you. And it's a pleasure to serve under you as chair this morning, Mr Paisley. And I would also like to congratulate the member for Don Valley on securing this debate, seeking to dig deeper into the educational attainment of boys at school, and to honourable members for sharing their views this morning. Indeed, the attainment gap between boys and girls is something that starts at an early age and grows throughout a boy's time at school. According to Department for Education statistics, by the end of the reception year in 22-23, just under 2/3 of boys had what was classed as a good level of development, compared to around 3/4 of girls. And by the end of primary school, the proportion of boys reaching the expected standards of reading and writing remains lower than girls. And going into secondary school, boys lag behind girls across every headline measure collected by the Department for Education, and, as has been raised by honourable members, are more likely to be excluded from school during this time. However, the issue that has been touched upon by members today are the other significant attainment gaps that exist within our school system. For example, following the COVID pandemic, we've seen the attainment gap between disadvantaged pupils and others grow. White boys from disadvantaged backgrounds also underperform those of other races and ethnicities. And that's why Labour has set out how we would tackle these inequalities in our education system, with our plan to break down the barriers of opportunity for everyone in this country, because all boys and girls should have the same opportunities to have an excellent education, leading to a good job and a good standard of living. And as we know, this gap starts at a young age, where boys start school at a lower attainment level and with less developed language skills. Indeed, the pandemic really shone a light on how a child's early language development goes on to affect their later education. And that's why Labour has called for primary school to be equipped with funding to deliver evidence-based early language interventions. And it's something that we would prioritise in government. With better communication skills, boys and girls will have boosted outcomes and better engagement with school. Research has also shown consistently that the attainment gap is largest for those on free school meals, coming from the poorest families. Again, an issue that has been raised by honourable members today. We all know that there are shocking levels of child poverty in this country, leaving children too hungry to learn. And that's why we would introduce free funded breakfast clubs in every primary school to provide children with a softer start to the school day, giving them an opportunity to play with their friends, to socialise, to develop their communication and social skills, as well as providing them a breakfast, setting them up well to learn throughout the day. We also know that the quality of teaching is a huge driver of pupils' attainment. And quite simply, there are not enough teachers in our schools. Many teachers feel overstretched, with turnover higher than before the pandemic, and there's no real plan to tackle these issues with their working conditions. They feel badly let down by this government. So to ensure we have the best and necessary teachers in our schools that can deliver the best life chances for all of our young people, Labour would recruit 6,500 new teachers to fill the gaps. And we would pay for that by ending the tax exemptions that private schools currently enjoy. I will give way.
For words and comments. This is a World Book Week and one of the events is taking place across in PCH. Is it the intention of the Honourable Lady as a Shadow Minister in this instance to ensure that looking forward to the future and should governments change or whatever may happen, would it be the intention of the Honourable Lady's party to ensure that books and reading would be a clear core part of any child's education?
Yeah, the Honourable Gentleman raises an important point, and indeed we will have a debate in here tomorrow about World Book Day and how important that reading and literacy is for children, and we recognise it as the absolute core foundation of every child's start in life and ensuring the best education for every child. And I'm pleased the Honourable Gentleman has highlighted that as well today. We would also reintroduce a school support staff negotiating body to ensure a proper voice for support staff, because we know they power our schools, but unfortunately at the moment they are leaving the profession in droves. I give way.
I'm very grateful to my own friend for giving way. Just turning back to Labour's plans to tax education, I wonder if the Labour Party have actually done any modelling as to how many children whose parents are struggling really hard to put their children through private education are going to end up then in the state sector, and how many children on assisted free places, bursaries, etc., funded by those private schools are going to end up back in the state sector.
So, as I said earlier, Labour believes that education should be a priority and it should be at the centre of national life for this country, and that ensures that requires ensuring that there is the funding necessary to ensure there are teachers. We know there are teaching gaps throughout our school system. Young people are not being taught by specialists in their subjects, and we know there is a shortage and teachers are struggling to manage the workloads as a result. And so Labour would prioritise ensuring that we do have that support for the teaching workforce, for the 93% of children that are educated within the state sector, and that would come by removing the current tax exemptions that private schools enjoy. It has been modelled by the Institute for Fiscal Studies and has shown very clearly that we would have a net benefit from the policy that would ensure we can produce the outcomes that I know honourable members are here to debate today on this very point of closing the attainment gap between the outcomes for all children at school, and particularly boys, that honourable members are highlighting today.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way again, and she has not given us the figure that I asked for in my earlier intervention. It's simply the view of myself, and I'm sure of all honourable members on this side of the House, that you do not level up opportunity by robbing opportunity from those that are already enjoying it.
Shadow Minister.
So it's very interesting that honourable members are here today to discuss what is the outcome of an education system currently that they are highlighting is letting children down, and that we also agree is letting children down. And after 14 years of being in government, it's quite remarkable that honourable gentlemen would take the attitude of a costed proposal that is seeking to meet some of the huge demands within our education system at the moment to meet the requirement to ensure every child has a teacher, every school has a teaching workforce that it needs, and that will be Labour's priority and the choice that we will make in government to ensure we have the education system that will meet the demands that are being presented in this debate today. And finally, I wanted to echo points that have been raised around mental health. We know that boys, as has been highlighted again today, are far less likely to reach out for support and often struggle to speak about mental health challenges. We know it's holding children and young people back, impacting on their ability to learn as well as on their health. And we see the number of children waiting for support continuing to rise and the absence levels in school continuing to rise too. I will give way.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we follow the lady's argument. And the argument, I believe, is she believes, it is going to a wider point as well, that we're going to put VAT on private schools and use that money to top up, to improve the education system. That is the argument. Now, we've also talking about, and I raised in my conversation, about suicide prevention as well. And obviously, suicide is a very complex issue when it comes to men, including things like mental health. Now, if the Labour Party wants to put VAT on private schools to help education, will the Honourable Lady, following the same logic, the Honourable Lady should agree that VAT should be on private healthcare to improve healthcare outcomes? So is that the Labour Party's position, to put VAT on private healthcare to help improve mental health outcomes as well?
So the Labour Party will obviously present when we put out our offer to government when the general election comes, that we are all waiting for at the moment, and we will put our fully costed plans in our manifesto, and we are very focused on increasing the mental health support for young people, which I will get to if I can just respond to the previous intervention. And we will pay for that by ending the current loopholes that the non-DOMs enjoy in this country and fund mental health support in that way, and breakfast clubs that I've already mentioned are intended to very much tackle the issues that honourable members have highlighted in this debate today, that after 14 years of Conservative government are getting worse, not better. And honourable members would be minded to note that, because they are making this case to their own government to find solutions to these problems, which a Labour government will respond to.
Before the member gives way, just to remind colleagues, this is a debate on boys' educational attainment of boys, not a general debate on a budget, which will come later in the week. Sir David Avenant.
I've listened with great interest, and obviously she's putting forward Labour Party policy generally, but I'm very concerned about what Labour would do if they ever got into government to help these working class boys achieve, because it's very generalised, the issues that she's raised.
Shadow Minister.
Well, I mean, I think the honourable gentleman, I wouldn't suggest that he hasn't been listening to my speech, but I have set out a whole range of measures that Labour would put in place to raise the attainment of every child. And going back to the point I was making about mental health support, that we would ensure that there are dedicated counsellors in every secondary school and that there are mental health hubs in every community, because we know that children are waiting and waiting and waiting, and their families, for the mental health support that children currently need, and their absence levels from schools are clearly having an impact as a result. So just to conclude, Mr Paisley, it's clear that there is an attainment gap between boys and girls, and it's Labour's view that we need to do everything we can in government, and we will, to break down the barriers to opportunity that too many of our children currently face. And I agree with honourable members, there is no silver bullet to solve this, which is why we have proposed a whole range of measures that will match the ambition that we have for every child. We would put education of all of our children at the heart of national life once again. It's the very least that our children and our country deserve.
Thank you, Shadow Minister. Minister David Johnson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Paisley. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and can I congratulate my honourable friend on securing a debate on this important subject. The last time he and I were at the same event on this topic was actually at a meeting of his APPG, where he had invited Richard Reeves to come and talk about his book of Boys and Men, where we discussed a lot of these issues, and which is a very interesting and thought-provoking book for anybody who hasn't read it. And in my previous life, as a charity director, I was involved with lots of organisations doing great work to support specifically boys through education and employment pathways. So I have a lot of sympathy with the issues that he raises, and I thank him for his continued campaigning on this very important issue. Now, this government's track record in education has been in improving standards dramatically, and we have been rising up the league tables internationally considerably, in stark contrast to Labour-run Wales, which has been falling down them. But it is the case that girls continue to outperform boys across most headline measures, although the gap has been narrowing. At Key Stage 2, the gap between boys and girls at the expected standard in reading, writing and maths has fallen since 2022, and it's the lowest since 2016. While this is in part due to a slight decrease in girls' attainment, increased attainment for boys in reading, writing and maths combined has also supported this. And similarly at Key Stage 4, there was a 6.6 percentage point gap between girls and boys achieving a grade 5 in English and maths in 2018-2019, and that was down to 4.3 percentage points in 2022-23. However, we know there's more to do, and raising attainment for all pupils, including boys, is at the heart of this government's agenda. And my honourable friend is right that boys' attainment is not currently as high as that of girls. He will also know that the attainment of some ethnic groups is not as high as some others, and he will also know that the attainment of free school meal children is not generally as high as non-free school meal children. And I know that the issue of white working class boys is something he has spoken about many times, as has my honourable friends and members for St Austell and Newquay, my right honourable friend for Bexley Heath and Crayford. And indeed, I was on the Education Select Committee at the time it did its report into the attainment of white working class boys, which the government at the time welcomed. That's why our approach is to provide schools and teachers with the resources and expertise to target support at those that need it most. Often that will be at disadvantaged young people, and the pupil premium helps provide extra support to improve the outcomes of disadvantaged pupils. This funding will rise to over 2.9 billion in the coming financial year, an 80 million increase from the year before. And we are targeting a greater proportion of schools' national funding formula towards deprived pupils than ever before. And this will be over 4.4 billion, or 10.2% of the formula allocated to deprivation this year. More broadly, we've invested significantly in education to ensure that all young people can reach their potential. The core schools budget next year will be the highest ever level in real terms per pupil, helping schools in their vital work to close attainment gaps and level up educational opportunities. Now, my honourable friend talked about the importance of literacy, amongst other things, as did my honourable friend and member for Darlington. And this is a key area of focus for us, because evidence shows that high-quality early childhood education, including language development and literacy, has a positive impact on outcomes in both the short and long term. I will.
On literacy, does you agree that it should be a statutory requirement every single primary school should have a library? But at the moment it's not. About 1 in 7 primary schools do not have a library.
Minister.
Well, can I thank my honourable friend for that intervention? I wasn't aware of that statistic, and I absolutely agree with him about the importance of libraries and of children reading. Indeed, when I visit primary schools in my own constituency, I tell all the children the most important thing they can be doing is reading a book at all times. So I very much share his enthusiasm for that. We've invested over £17 million in the Nuffield Early Language Intervention, improving the language skills of reception-age children who need it most following the pandemic. And our English Hubs programme is improving the teaching of reading with a focus on phonics, early language development and reading for pleasure. And it's provided appropriate and targeted support to over 5,000 schools across England since it was launched. Targeted support is also being provided through the National Tutoring Programme, with almost 5 million courses started through the programme since it began in November 2020. In 2022-23, more than half of the pupils tutored under the programme were boys, and we expect tutoring to continue to be a staple offer from schools, continuing to provide targeted support for those children that need it most. Now, just two small points before I carry on with the rest of the speech. One, my honourable friend, member for Darlington, raised the important issue of SEND. I completely agree with him. I had a very good visit to Beaumont Hill in his constituency and was very impressed with the dedication of the staff team there. And my honourable friend, the member for St Austell and Newquay, also talked about the education challenges in coastal areas like his. He will know Cornwall is one of our education investment areas precisely for that reason, to be given a package of additional funding and support. I will.
I'm very grateful to Michael for giving way. He's been incredibly generous with his time. Can I place on the record my thanks to him for visiting the fantastic school that is Beaumont Hill last week. My sincere apologies for not being able to join him on that visit. But was he able to visit the site of our planned 48-place new special school?
Yes, sir. I unfortunately wasn't, although they did indicate what the plans were going to be. Now, attendance is obviously fundamental here. So ensuring children, achieving their full potential requires them to be in school, which is a big priority for us. And we're more than doubling the number of attendance hubs to support 2,000 schools, investing £15 million to expand one-to-one mentoring. Lots of members, including the member for Don Valley, have talked about the importance of mentoring to help 10,000 children, and we'll be requiring all schools to share data to support early intervention. Our plan is working with 380,000 fewer children persistently absent or not attending last year, and numbers continue to fall. My honourable friend, the member for Rother Valley, talked about how few men are working in the early years, and he's right to raise this, and it's something I wrote a piece about a few weeks ago, trying to encourage more men into the early years. And on the teaching workforce, more broadly, my honourable friend, the member for Don Valley, is right that men make up a smaller proportion of the teaching workforce than women. It is important we attract more male teachers to the profession. We have seen some change in this. So in state-funded nursery and primary schools, we've seen an increase of over 6,500 male teachers since 2010. But we do want to go further through our campaigns to attract and retain excellent teachers, including more men. And we want teaching to be an attractive and competitive profession. And from September just gone, starting salaries rose to at least £30,000 in all areas of the country, alongside a 6.5% pay award for experienced teachers and leaders in the last financial year, ensuring all teachers launch their career on a competitive starting salary. On exclusions, creating a culture with high expectations of behaviour is very important, and our behaviour in schools guidance provides clarity and support to schools to help them create calm, safe and supportive environments. We are clear that permanent exclusion should only be used when absolutely necessary and as a last resort. And this should not mean exclusion from education. And I have been concerned by what my honourable friend, the member for St Austell and Newquay, has described to me, and we are looking at what action may need to be taken there. Just touching briefly on professions, because I used to work in widening access to professions before I became an MP. And again, my honourable friend and member for Don Valley is absolutely right, that in professions like the medical profession and law and so on, we've seen a huge shift from them being overwhelmingly male to overwhelmingly female in their entrance. Less so at senior levels, but certainly in entrance to the professions, that is the case. And I used to work on this issue partly from the aspect of class and socioeconomic background, because actually what a lot of those professions had done was been successful in recruiting more women and ethnic minorities, but disproportionately from private schools and professional families. And if you were male or female, black, white or Asian, it was harder for you to get into those professions, considerably harder. If you were from a working class background, you are 24 times more likely to become a doctor if a parent's a doctor. And only 6% are from a working class background. So I agree with him about this issue, and I would only say that there are a number of issues about access to these professions, and more work needed to make sure that who gets into them is representative of the country at large. The member for Strangford and others set out the importance of people, especially boys, understanding the full range of jobs and careers that are open to them, and having mentors and other support to encourage them along those pathways. And that's a big part of the Career and Enterprise Company's network of enterprise advisors, who are volunteers from businesses who help schools in that regard. We accept that there is always more that can be done to improve outcomes for children of all backgrounds, including boys, and we'll continue our work to ensure that in every area, children can access excellent schools, have access to high-quality technical and higher education, and go on to good jobs. I'm enormously grateful to my honourable friend for continually raising the issue of educational attainment for boys. The government agrees boys should feel included and supported at school to help them reach their full potential, and will continue to work to deliver our commitment of building a world-class education system for all children and young people.
Thank you, Minister. I'll call Mr Fletcher for a couple of minutes to wind.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for everyone who's come and taken part in this debate today. It's an extremely important debate. I'd also like to put on record my thanks to Mark Brooks, who was a colleague and a friend and a huge amount of work on this over the past few decades. Genuinely pleased with many of the remarks that have come. One thing that has come through to me is the importance of family. And we do put an awful lot on the teachers. I genuinely also believe, as my honourable friend from Bexley Heath said, we do tend to put too much on teachers these days a lot of the time. And the family is the silver bullet to everything. I genuinely do believe the family is the silver bullet. And we've got, unfortunately, 2.6 million separated families out there with 4 million children belonging to those 2.6 million separated families. And there'll be an awful lot of boys there who have not got a male role model in their life, and we really need to take that on board. It's a huge problem that's coming down the line, and we need to do everything that we can to get mentors and role models in front of these young boys, because if we don't, then they can quite easily end up on a path which is not one that we want to take. And as a society, it will not just cost us in a society that we don't want to belong to, but also actually cost us a fortune as well, looking after these boys when they've gone on the wrong path too. I was hoping we was going to get a little bit more from the Minister today. There's some really easy wins there for us that won't cost us any money. Just literally right into the schools and saying to them, please, please, will you just look at this gender attainment gap, if it exists in your school. And if it doesn't, fantastic, well done. Come back to us and tell us what you're doing to make sure that it's not exist. But if it does exist, just acknowledge it. We need to acknowledge that there's a gap there, because I just think the first sign of madness is, it's doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. And we can't be in a position like that with our boys. If we let boys down at 11 years old, as I say, we've got a huge problem in the future. And there was just one word that my honourable friend from Rother Valley said, and it's, I mentioned it myself, it's the expectation. We should expect boys to do well. We should expect boys to do well. They can do well. With the right support, they will do well. But once again, thank you for everyone for coming. Unfortunately, I do feel a little bit sorry for the Minister. No Labour MPs here today, which is really, really disappointing. It just proves if they did get into government what they would do with working class boys and boys as a whole, not a lot. But unfortunately, we are where we are. But thank you everybody on this side. Thank you.
The question is that the House has considered the educational attainment of boys. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. Order. Hello. How's you? Very well, thank you.